host, James, and this is my co-host, Anthony. And tonight, we have a great adventure that we're going to take you on. I'm not exactly sure what that adventure shall be, but Anthony shall inform us all of the journey ahead.
Oh yeah, hey, then look, we're just going by the balls and see where it takes us, because I've got very little sense of direction. I'm all about the journey.
Nice. So what's been happening over the last week, Anthony?
Working and coming home. I have been thinking a lot though, because you had mentioned wanting to kind of talk about bloats, and I had said we could do something maybe about rituals in general. But one thing that's also been on my mind, for those of you that don't know, I am very much into the woo stuff, paranormal conspiracies. That's not really where I'm thinking on going for this. But when it comes to rituals and lore, we have discussed lightly on a few occasions about being mindful of where you're getting your information on your practice. And we've mentioned Mr. Stephen Flowers on a few occasions. And not that I necessarily want to pick on him, but I feel like he is a very good example of not just misinformation, but intentional. So, like, what I kind of wanted to touch on is where he started, and use him as an example. So, for those that don't know, Edward Thorson, Mr. Stephen Flowers, is a member of the Temple of Set, while also being the founder of the Rune Guild. And this is important to know, because the Temple of Set was founded by Mr. Michael Aquino. And because this is going on YouTube, all I'm going to say is that there's a lot of controversies with this guy. Look up his name a little bit. It's all there. But he founded the Temple of Set after...
You're referring to the pedophilia.
Yes. Among
pedophilia and the... Yeah, no, he was the officer who wrote the book on psyops.
Yes. And he founded the Temple of Set after being a priest in Anton LaVey's Church of Satan and not liking what it had become. So, I forget the year, but he did a ritual during Walpurgisnacht, and I'm not super familiar with what this is about. The base information I've gotten is that allegedly it is a Germanic holiday acknowledging and honoring the darker side of Freya. I have not found anything to corroborate that, but that is the little bit that I found. But regardless, he did this ritual on Walpurgisnacht to have what he called the infernal mandate transferred from the Church of Satan to his new organization. And the reason he calls it the Temple of Set is during this ritual, a entity that identified itself as Set acknowledged him and transferred the quote-unquote infernal mandate. Not to be a reconstruction of the ancient Egyptian polytheism, but more of a left-hand path, become your own god, anti-natural path, anti-society. And the base is in no way any kind of paganism. And so these are the two people that... So LaVey mentored Aquino, and Aquino mentored Flowers. And as far as I understand, to this day, he has never renounced or said anything about him leaving. In fact, I've heard the contrary. So as far as I understand, Mr. Flowers is still a member of the Temple of Set, and his education in the esoteric has filtered through to the Rune Guild and the overall Germanic Asatru themes up to this point. And it's something that I honestly feel needs to be addressed and countered. So I just wanted to use him as an example of knowing the base of the people that you're reading from. Like, I do not feel that Mr. Flowers is at all in any way a true Asatruar, heathen, Norse pagan, whatever term you want to use. That is not the basis of his spiritual beliefs. That is the language he uses to spout his left-hand path. Similar to the way you will see these same people promote Gnostic ideals, even Christian ideals. And so again, coming back to bloats, runes, rituals, this is why me and you talk so much about going to the sources, or groups like the Noriana Society, who are people that actually practice the faith. I don't know if I was all over the place on that. If I was, I apologize. Hopefully you can kind of help me make better sense of what I'm trying to say.
Right. I think the broader topic is occultism in today's practice of quote-unquote Germanic paganism, in the influences, where it comes from, has it intentionally been perverted in a way by certain forces or people or groups of individuals, and then how do we navigate through that? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I mean, this will be the third one where we've brought up Stephen Flowers in his work, and you really can't help but do that, because his work is so pervasive in people that are interested in learning about Germanic paganism, magic systems, and things like this, because that's really what Stephen Flowers did. Was he wrote different works on how to create magical systems for people to practice and follow.
Yeah, I mean,
not to mention that and also we can't leave out that he also does have a PhD, and he has focused on specifically runes in his education and works, which is, to me, the most dangerous part of it, because he is the person that knows the history of the runes in depth, and he's able to weave in this system that is foreign to our people. And this really gets at the root of a broader topic, is where do these systems come from, and how do we recognize them, and how do we move past them and bring people to have the awareness of our true faith and our true practice and our true tradition. But we have to start before Stephen Flowers, because really, if you look at, for example, even Guido von List, he's very, very influential in Germanic pagan circles. A lot of people take his work as the Bible, quote unquote, not literally the Bible, but as an authoritative text of a tradition worthy to pass on. And I don't mean in any way to denigrate Guido von List, because I think the work that he did was very important. He brought awareness, the folk consciousness, and the whole renaissance of the 1800s and the early 1900s of the folk soul. And he definitely was an important figure in our folk history. But we have to recognize where the ideas that he introduced, where these come from. So I know that we mentioned in the last episode about, his ideas coming from, kind of the East, which I'm not sure if a lot of people know or not, but Guido von List pretty much copied Helena Blavatsky's secret doctrine. And that is where these ideas come from that he perpetuated. I have no doubt that his experiences, his visions, were probably very real to him, and that he was very honest in his, I don't know what you would call it, in his rendition of that when he was teaching other people. But these occultist ideas were just flowing throughout Europe in the 1800s and 1900s. And these ideas came from, essentially, if you strip all of the layers down, they come from the Middle East. They come from Western Asia and parts of Africa, and even some of the more eastern parts of Asia as well.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Helena Blavatsky was also very openly satanic / Luciferian in her verbiage and ideals. Matter of fact, the first magazine she started was, I believe, Lucifer Rising or Lucifer's Light.
They followed very much like the Hermetic tradition, which is very rooted in Kabbalistic theology and philosophy. Why is this important, though, for us to understand, Anthony?
Because it's a different base it's a completely separate foundation of the esoteric and exoteric, or the inner rituals and the outer rituals, beliefs, values, cosmology, everything. Everything about how they approach everything is just completely different. It doesn't have a base in our ancestral, spiritual, physical worldview.
And additionally, for those who are also not aware about Helena Blavatsky, she was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, which is one of the organizations in the late 1800s and early 1900s that was a part of building kind of this occultist, Germanic, secret, quote-unquote, society that was looking to help influence Europe. Now, I think the intentions are pure on the part of Guido von List, and I think the things that he had did and he had taught to other people were important things. And it's really hard to try to talk down about somebody like Guido von List. And the reason why I say that is because our history as a folk, after the Christian church essentially came into Europe, stripped us of our belief systems, outlawed our practices and our beliefs, hid, or I wouldn't say hid, but changed the meaning of words, changed the meaning of theological principles that our people had understood for thousands of years. And what had happened is we became a people that only knew the history from the Christian worldview that had conquered us 1,500 years ago. And so in the Renaissance of the 1800s, as people are awakening and they are becoming aware of these things, of course there's going to be information that isn't accurate, or information that they are learning about at that time, because so much of it had been hidden. The worldview of our ancestors had been hidden. And there's a purpose behind that, and we'll get to that for sure. But I like to look at figures like Guido von List as the growth of our society, or the growth of our folk, as, you know, just as my own children. You know, my son might be in 3rd grade and he writes this paper and he writes this book report on a book that he read, and he gives his own opinions on it. And even though it may not be the masterpiece of my son for his life's work, it's a really great thing. It's part of the development of my son. And it's the same thing with these figures in our history, that even though their works may not necessarily be the masterpiece or be everything there is to understand, and even though there may be things wrong about it, this is still part of the history of the development of our folk and our people, as we're reacquiring our understanding of our traditions and our true history of our people.
Which also comes back to the things that we've talked about before, about being open to expanding your knowledge base, you know, because like I agree with you. I don't think Mr. Von List was malicious. He was a stepping stone, and we need to be willing to reevaluate certain things and expand upon and take what has a proper base and grow upon it and shed that which doesn't.
Give me an example.
I don't know much about Von List or his system. He's one that I have stayed away from. But one example that I can give is in Taking Up the Runes by Diana Paxson. I have found her rune meditations to work very well for me. I don't agree with her universalist approach, and there are things in her teachings that I recognize coming from other places. But again, I like her meditations. I find her rune meditations. I find that they do have a power and they work very well for me. So that's the best example I can give on that train of thought.
I personally, I don't really care for Diana Paxton. But when I was first learning, I definitely read her book on runes, and it did kind of give me I felt like a better understanding of some of the, I guess you would call them, theological concepts of the runes themselves. But as I've grown in my studies over the years, I've sort of come to understand the runes to work in a different way than what most people think of them working as. And what I mean by that, and we go back to Stephen Flowers, aka Edward Thorson, in his works on the runes, where he's built these magical systems essentially based off of his Temple of Set book, the Black Runa, where he incorporates Egyptian / Kabbalistic attributes to the symbols that we recognize as the runes today. And he created this magical system based off of that. And I think that those ideas have seeped in like worms, you know, they have seeped in and have pervaded a lot of authors over the last 30 years that have written about the runes, because there is a demand. People want to know about these things. People want to understand them. And everybody's interested in learning about magic per se. What is magic? You know, they want to be able to understand some type of magical system and feel like they have some way of influencing things around them.
I would agree with that. I mean, my rune knowledge is much more basic than yours. It's only something I've really recently been putting more time and focus into.
Right. So, the runes for me are certainly, they contain magical properties about them, but the symbols themselves aren't necessarily magical, if that makes sense. What makes them magical is the way that you tie the runes together. And I know that there's people that know about, like, for example, learning the runes in a certain specific order, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason to learn, you know, the 3 8s, what goes with the different 8s, phrase 8, Heimdall's 8, Tyr's 8. There's a reason of learning these all in a specific order. And learning them doesn't in itself give you the ability to cast magic per se, but learning them just on the basic level will teach you or prepare you for the next step, which has to do with combining the runes and specific patterns that create magical results. That's a good way of putting it.
Because, like, when I think about it, like, I almost think as of each individual rune as like a pool of a specific type of power. Like, this is almost going to sound like an oxymoron, but not that they necessarily are a power in of themselves, but when tapped, they're able to be used as a tool, as a power. Like, that almost sounds hypocritical, but I'm not sure how to say it better than that.
I know what you're trying to get at. And here's the thing is, when I say, the runes in and of themselves, like, just the symbol of it is not what is magical, because I mean there's alphabets in almost every single language in the world today, and some of these alphabets have been around for thousands of years, not just ours. But what makes them magical is the combination of them, the words of them, the speech of them, the spelling, and I guess you would call it like bind runes, where you're binding something to have a specific result, in your intentions. I mean, it goes back to the creation myth with Ymir, the screamer, right?
Yeah.
The sound. Speaking of which, I shared that video with you of NASA releasing the first time ever the sound of a black hole.
Yeah.
That was pretty crazy.
That was pretty crazy. I mean, there's some theories that space doesn't exist as we think it does, but this isn't the venue for those discussions. But yes, it was super interesting. The sounds of a black hole. It kind of gave me some shivers.
Jessica and my daughter, they both thought that they heard like some type of sounds, like people were like some type of singing or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't catch people. It just like gave me a weird feeling. Like, I'm much more like on a quote unquote feeling vibes. I pick up that type of stuff really well. It wasn't entirely pleasant, but it wasn't not pleasant. Like, I don't know. It's something people got to hear for sure.
Right. I mean, getting back to the runes and the magic of them, and why it's important why it's important to recognize the sources, as you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, diving into this topic, is that if you are not learning the proper traditional way of learning, for example, our magic system for the Germanic people, or the runes per se, you're practicing a system that you don't even really are understanding what the consequences of that are. It's just like when people are trying to do magic and they're just learning, and everybody starts at a certain phase or a certain place, and they develop over the years, but sometimes you do things you're not understanding what you're doing, in a ritual, and you can unlock forces or things, cause results to happen that could be devastating for you or other people around you. You don't really understand, the full spectrum of what one is doing.
If you do not if you don't truly understand the powers behind the magical system that you're using, you don't entirely know what you could be bringing on yourself. So like for me, like being a hard polytheist, I acknowledge the existence of other divine groups. And when you're using the magical systems, tied to and stemming from these divine groups. Different beings influence different aspects of the magical and the esoteric. So if you are using something in a way that it's not supposed to be used, you could potentially get on the bad side of one of these divine beings, and not only will what you are trying to do not work or work in a way that you did not intend, you could also bring the wrath of these divine beings upon yourself and not even know where it's coming from.
Industry, for example, because I mean, when you speak about the runes in today's modern age, as we mentioned several times in just this conversation alone, Stephen Flowers is the leading figure of that, because he is the person that published these books, essentially melding together the Kabbalistic system, the Jewish, I guess you call it mystical system, if you will, into Germanic paganism. And so this was the only book around for decades and decades that people had to learn, so they weren't aware of other systems. And so they study these, they learn them, and then they're practicing these things. And then they, I don't know. then they feel confused, when they start learning about the traditional system and how runes were traditionally learned, and then they feel at conflict or odds with themselves. And kind of a little bit what we talked about last week in the episode, where we started talking about moving forward, and people not wanting to change what they're doing because they don't want to feel like what they were doing was invalid. But the biggest point to that for me is this, and I'm not sure if everybody understands, is that there's a spiritual war that's taking place. And this is from the beginning of time. And the war is order versus chaos. And you and I were talking about the latest trend of people, worshiping Fenrir and trying to call him back, like the Rune Guild, to bring about Ragnarok. And I had mentioned about the storekeeper talking about that Ragnarok is just the chaotic forces, or nature is just a natural process of the universe, or nature consuming itself so that there could be a new beginning, right? And where this goes wrong is that at the end of the story, and this goes for all of the Loki worshippers or Lokians out there, is at the end of the story, the gods prevail. It was the chaotic forces that were trying to destroy them, and they were unsuccessful in the end. And order in life continues. We win.
Yeah, I feel like
story.
I feel like they misconstrue the fact that there is a necessary level of chaos to help things grow, but these beings are beyond that level of necessary chaos. They are chaos for destruction's sake, not for growth.
Right. So you've heard my theory about Suthor and Lothar and Loki, of course, and we've been over it many times in past episodes. Not going to really revisit that aspect, but so tying all of that together with this is when we talk about history, and then you have the merging of different societies and different religious beliefs, and you have one people conquering another people, and as we know, we have Christianity that essentially waged a very vicious war against our folk throughout Europe. And what happened is that this is an extension of a very ancient battle that's been taking place. And, you have Christianity today where they speak about like monotheism, where there's just one God to worship. And even though it gets kind of confusing for people because they're like, well, it's one God, but in three forms. oh, well, there's, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one and three, and I don't know, they're trying to do mental gymnastics, if you will, to get around the fact that it's still polytheistic in belief. It's not monist in any way or fashion. But I believe that these histories tie in together. I believe that the history of all people are tied in together somewhere, and that we can look at things like, for example, the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and we can actually get glimpses of things that were going on between these different people and our ancestors during those time frames. First myth I'd like to dissolve is, anybody that's practicing Christianity that thinks, that the Bible only teaches you that there's one God. You got to go back and read the Bible. I mean, the Bible is filled with verses in the Old Testament talking about different gods. And in fact, the very first commandment in the Bible is, thou shalt not worship other gods besides me, for I am a jealous God. And to me, I see this as a very Lokian-like nature, where I feel like there's some sort of connection to that Lokian aspect there. And people talk about, this God in the Old Testament that was like a burning bush in the desert. And it's really funny, the connection to the fire there and what we understand about like Sutor, and I believe that these mergings of history of two different people coming together and one dominating the other with the conquering and the propagation of a foreign faith and belief system was their way to enslave our people spiritually. And thus the reason why they completely wiped out our history 1,000 years ago.
So you speculate that Yahweh is Suthor?
I don't know if it's exactly him or some force tied to him, but it seems very convenient that this is a being that somehow controls fire, thus the burning bush in the desert, a very jealous God, as the Bible describes him. And here is the thing, is like, my theory is that Lothar essentially becomes jealous of Odin, and he didn't like Odin being picked as the god that would be the Allfather, the one that essentially would designate positions for the other gods, the person that would be Mimir's replacement. He didn't like that. And later in the story, Loki enters it, and I believe that that was like a name taboo, that Lothar was no longer spoken of in the lore later on, and that references then began using the term Loki because there was a name taboo somewhere in the tradition of the story that happened over time. To me, the characteristics, when you are trying to like make a comparison between different systems and different gods, you have to look at the attributes of the gods to see where they correspond at, not just like names, if that makes sense. And to me, the attributes that's described in the Old Testament regarding the attributes of what we know about Sutor, for he rises against the gods. And this isn't just, this isn't just stuff being pulled out of the hat, today. These are things that are written about in the Old Testament as well, when they're talking about all the wars that were transpiring between the different peoples in those regions at that time. Some of those regions and some of those people were our ancestors that are being spoken about. And a lot of people don't know that. And so I I firmly believe that these stories are interconnected and woven together. It's just about trying to understand how they actually connect and what has happened over the last 1,500 years when our entire continent of people have been brainwashed into this foreign religion. And remember, it only takes like 2 generations till it only takes 2 generations to make people forget things that happened.
Yeah. I mean, when things aren't talked about for 80 years, they disappear.
Exactly. Which is crazy when you think about it, because even though they were persecuting pagans in Europe, and they were doing this, they still do it to this day to some extent in some places, but not as bad as like in the mid thousands, when you get into like the 15, 16, 17, 1800s, they were really persecuting people, like the witch trial and the Inquisition, where they're just going about essentially killing pagans is what's happening. These are trials of pagans, people that they're catching that are practicing the old ways. And it's amazing with all of these things happening that our folklore still survived, because we were still telling our kids about it in stories, and we would hide it in stories and teach them about our morals and our history in our stories.
So on the same train of thought, because we have also both talked about how we have to stay away from the unifying approach of all gods are the same. So from your perspective, how do we navigate what seems to be this gray area with the similarities of Yahweh and Suthor without falling down the rabbit hole of all the gods are the same, therefore they're all one, and all the goddesses are the same, and therefore they're all one?
That's a good question, and it can be difficult. But what I'm doing here is not unifying or making the gods one and the same. What I'm doing is recognizing from our own traditions, where we recognize that different beings come from different sources, and everything out there that's living is a living being, and everything out there, you can get benefit or favor from. Trees, for example, very holy to our folk for a very important reason. Trees are very conscious. They know what's going on around them. I don't know if I mentioned this in a episode in the past before, but a tree is so conscious that it even knows the seedlings in its grove. If they're struggling for nourishment, they're able to actually send nutrients to their own seedlings. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And these are just, scientific things that we're learning today about them, but that our folk understood for thousands of years.
Say we have talked about that, yeah.
Just like you or me, or you or I, somebody can come to you and say, Anthony, I need protection, and they could give you a gift for that protection, and you can extend your protection to them. And it's the same way with anything that exists in this entire universe, in this entire creation, that you can call upon different things and you can extract energy, you can extract different favors that help benefit you, that harm other people, or maybe they'll just be oblivious to your requests. I mean, there's a lot of things that can come out of that, but people have to just be aware that our religion isn't necessarily always just about the gods themselves, which are obviously very important to our faith and our own ancestry, but that everything around us is living, is breathing, and we can get favor from all of these. And I don't think that's any different with like the stories that we see in the Bible with this Old Testament God, where it's a being from a different source than ours, that has created a following of people or folk that are different than ours to worship him. And their objective, according to the Old Testament, was essentially to go destroy every other god that exists.
So
and the people that follow those gods.
So touching on the spirit portion, are you of, like, for lack of a better term, an animism point of view?
I think that animism is valid to a certain degree because everything is a living being, but I'm not to the point that we all share like the same spirits.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like, I believe each individual tree is its own tree. It has its own consciousness, and I think that their trees are able to tap into a greater consciousness. And it's funny, as Kaya and I had this discussion a few weeks back actually about trees and how trees are very aware of what their purpose is in life. Whereas humans, we're not necessarily as aware of our purpose or our destiny until we become older and someone teaches us about the things that we need to know.
I mean, I would argue these days, even just getting older isn't necessarily a guarantee you're going to figure it out.
Very true. Well, that has to do with there is no horizontal transmission of information anymore. It's all vertical. It's transmitted from a single source to everybody in the whole world because they're trying to get us all to believe and think the same things. And that's why it's important that we recreate this horizontal transmission of information. And what I mean by that, and I've referenced this in previous episodes, is that we begin passing down these stories from our generation to the next, like we have always done for thousands of years. And that's how our folklore has survived, not just history itself and time, but also has survived a lot of things with Fusion, where they outlaw us speaking about these things, when they outlaw, certain rituals or acts or public acknowledgments, things like that. It survived all of those things because we knew the importance of it, and we have to continue to do that. We have to speak to our children. We have to teach them these stories, teach them their history, because if we don't, they are going to fall prey to this vertical transmission of information that is trying to hypersexualize our children and do very nasty things to them mentally, physically, but most important, spiritually. Because if they kill our knowledge of our identity of who we are, then we have nothing.
Yeah, if we don't give them a foundation, there's so much information out there that they'll essentially corrupt themselves, because that's the only thing that's there if we don't give it to them. And
it makes me think about like these occultist movements where, because most of the occultist movements are, they have their secret organization, and only those worthy are able to learn the secrets. And, if you do memorize all these different symbols and you do these specific rites, then you'll start to understand. And when you actually start delving into these things, because when I was younger, I got into a lot of different things, Hermeticism, Aleister Crowley. I was very interested in these different systems as I was learning. And at the end of the day, what they're actually doing is they are feeding forces, as you had mentioned, that are foreign to our people, that actually were seeking to harm our people. How do you tie it all back together with the occult?
How to articulate this? I guess I just come back to, like we talked about in the beginning, knowing the roots of the information that you're getting, understanding where those roots sit. Are they of your folk or are they not? and that basic human understanding of if it's not of our own, it's probably not good for us. You know, that no one system of people's occult knowledge was more powerful or less powerful than the other, but it was made and benefits the folk that it came from. And,
Right.
you know, so like the Germanic, Norse, Anglo-Saxon systems, the systems of our folk benefit us. The systems of the native folk benefit them. The systems of African folk benefit them, and so on and so forth. And that these systems can only ever truly be passed on a superficial level to those that are not of that folk, and those that are not of that folk that use these systems use it to the benefit of another folk and the detriment of their own.
Right. And let me make a mention about something I think that's important when we're talking about this, because we first started talking about the runes and in different histories and stuff, and this being a spiritual war that has went on for thousands of years since the beginning of time, is that these systems, as you mentioned, are to benefit specific people. We have a system that come from our ancestors that benefit us, and other folk have systems that benefit their people. But what I don't think people understand about the deeper spiritual level of this is that these are like spells that have been cast. This is magic that is being worked. The storytelling of how the narrative comes to be is essentially a reworking of consciousness. So if you are learning a system that's foreign to you, you are essentially falling victim to a spell from another system that is trying to consume your soul or your mind into that consciousness. And this is why it's important for us to attach ourselves to our native tradition and our native systems, because we are going to grow stronger by doing that. And we have to control the narrative against those who would seek to pervert that understanding. We have to take that narrative away, because our words are magic. I know that's a really cheesy, corny line said by lots and lots of people, but they really are. The way that we tell our stories, the way that we transmit our knowledge is the working of magic. It is what is going to make us become self-dependent and stronger if we allow ourselves to immerse into that tradition instead of seeking answers from sources from other traditions.
And like one thing that I want to clear up is that's what we're not saying here is being a gatekeeper for those of our folk that are trying to learn. What we are specifically talking about is defending against foreign influences that seek to weaken our folk spiritually, and through that mentally, physically, emotionally.
Although there is a certain amount of gatekeeping that is natural to that, because you hear people say, you know, for example, oh, there's no dogma. There's no dogma. No, there absolutely is dogma. 100%. Our people had rules. Our people had certain ways of doing things, and there was things that were just completely rejected. And dogma is what actually gives us our strength, because we know what those rules are. We know what that information is, and that's what essentially is the print in the book, for a lack of a better way of saying it, that tells us, this is the way you do it.
Yeah. And we have said this before, that every spiritual religious system has dogma. Just because it may be softer or not as detailed as, say, a Christian dogma, every spiritual path has has accepted values, honorable and things that make you honorable, things that make you dishonorable, rules for living, and these are dogmas. So to say that we don't have dogma is to say we do not have a code of ethics, moral standards, and values, which we absolutely do. Therefore, we have dogma.
I usually find it's people that are atheists that tend to always side on the "there is no dogma" motto. Not so much the people that are, inclined to actually practicing a belief in the reality of our gods being real.
I can agree with that. I would also not because I was going to say people that are more political than spiritual, but those people would also be more atheists. So, yeah, we're saying the same thing.
So when we talk about the occult or mysticism, a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, what exactly is the tradition of our people in this regard? What is the system? How do we learn this? What would your answer be to them, Anthony?
Well, the two easy answers are the runes and Galderlag. But then it's okay, what does that necessarily mean? Which systems? Because, we have the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark, the Anglo-Saxon system, the Armenian system propagated by Mr. Von List. I don't know, when I think of occult and mysticism, I think of the personal, spiritual, inner practices that are only called to by a few. I'm going to catch flack for this, but for instance, I don't think every single person out there should or is capable of using the runes and Galderlag. So, I don't know. That's for me. That's a hard one to answer because I come back to I don't think that specific approach is what anybody and everybody should be doing. You might disagree with me.
Well, I look at it as the occult is the occult knowledge. The true occult knowledge is just living and understanding what you do and how it affects things around you. Last week we talked about, that there are patterns and everybody can see the patterns, but not everybody can read them the same. And that's the occult knowledge. That's, understanding how things tie together. Every time we speak, we're speaking information to other people that are creating ideas and thoughts in their head. And those ideas and thoughts reverberate throughout people's lives. I remember things that people told me when I was a kid that impacted my life, but I didn't realize it at that time when I was a child, when the words were spoken to me. But later in life, you tend to think back to things, especially when you've made mistakes in your life, like I have, where you think back to where people are trying to give you good guidance and how those things affect you. And then moving forward, knowing those things, how you affect other people. I had and this doesn't have anything to do with our faith or magic per se, but I had there was this guy that I knew when I was a kid, and some people were picking on him, And it was a group of boys, and I think there might have been about 10 or 12 of them. And this was, you know, just a young kid. He was about 11 years old at the time. I was like 13, and this group of boys were picking on this kid, and essentially I stood up for the kid, and I protected him. And at the end of the day, it was me and that kid and this other guy that were fighting. Like, I think it was about 13, 14 people. And to me, as a kid, that was just a fight. We got into it. It was over. Blah, 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 blah. Life went on. Didn't see that kid for almost 20 years. 20 years after that. Facebook comes around. Somehow this kid finds me. He's not a kid anymore. He's a grown man at this time. And he's like, oh my God, man, we got to talk. I got to call you. What's your phone number, right? And give him my phone number. And he gets on the phone with me, and he's just telling me about how influential I had been in his life, that I had stood up for him. And he didn't have a father that was a part of his life. And that was like the first act of manhood that he had really ever witnessed. And he just went on and on about how impactful that was to the rest of his life. And I never thought about it. All those years, never thought about it. But those things that obviously stuck with him impacted his life for the better. And to me, that's the occult knowledge, is when you come into this understanding about how you interact with people, the words that you say, the things that you do, that's your magic. That's what you're working. That's your life work, the things that you're actually creating. It's not the intellectual masturbation of, you know, like, I know all of this information, but it's how you use that information to change the world around you.
Yeah, you told me that story before personally, but I like how you essentially brought it back to, it's the understanding that the things we do not only impact ourselves, but the people that we come into contact with. And how a lot of times we won't know the lesson or the impact until much later.
Exactly. And that's what it is for, like, the importance of living the tradition of our ancestors in today's world, is because that is a magical spell. That is the occult of our faith. And it's what gives us strength, and it's what helps us grow, and it's what helps us become better. And that's why it's so important, because otherwise we're just, you know, left as nothing with no guidance. And we're just, I guess you would call it like a soulless being that attaches to other forces or entities or groups of people and becomes what they are.
Very superficially.
Very superficial. Speaking of which, slightly changed the flow of the discussion here, but it ties together with it. You saw the post by the Ermin folk with their Shmirta ritual.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to talk to that guy in depth. What is his name? Michael. Last name starts with an S. I'm drawing a blank.
I can't think of the last name. It's so like Savidio or something like that. Savado or.
Yeah, but
Serginio, or I don't know. I just know him as Mike, but yeah.
He's been around a long time. I don't want to disrespect the guy by slaughtering his last name.
Which I just did. I am sorry, Mike, if you listen. I don't even know if he listens to this podcast. Probably not. But I'm sorry if I slaughtered your last name.
Yeah, but they essentially...
Now I feel like I should look it up on Google and just get it right.
Yeah. No, but I mean, essentially they made, what was it, an Odin, Thor, and Freyr altar statues, and they blooded them, and they were talking about how as soon as they blooded the Thor one, like thunder rumbled, like as soon as they finished, like that's intense.
Yeah. So Mike Sagenario is his name, but no, yes. So when they hallowed the idol, they were creating the idols, and they were doing a smearta ritual on it, and they hallow it and call and name the idol. That a boom, like thunder, happens afterwards, and then somebody just happened to catch a picture of the fire in front of the sacred area that they had during their summer Halloween, which is the biggest event on the East Coast once a year, um, for pagan folk at least. But they caught the smoke from the fire coming up, and it formed the image of the idol that was similar to, but you can clearly see the shape of some sort of face in the smoke, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah, I didn't see that picture. I'm gonna have to go back and look those over.
Yeah. No, look at it closely. I'm gonna post it in the Sacred Stew group too on Telegram, just so if anybody wants to see what those pictures look like. But we had talked about the Shmirta ritual before in season 1, where we were talking about the story about Odin and his brothers creating Ask and Imbla, and how this also ties to a specific ritual of creating your idols and imbuing them with the essence of the god in there that has power and such. So I believe that this was the first public ritual that was done, where the Shmirta ritual was performed, and these are the results. You know, people that question whether or not traditional rituals like this are a real thing and are valid, I think the results speak for themselves. I've been part of rituals, and I have seen things happen, and that are just blow your mind like this. And they're very powerful, and they do actually help create that faith in the folk when it is in a public ritual like that, because people can see with their own eyes and not just hear the stories told about it and doubt.
Yeah,
That's why if you're a load practitioner and you're uncertain about what you're doing, you have to get involved with local groups around you. And I hear a lot of people always say, like, well, there's no other pagans around me where I live. There are, but they're just like you. They're sitting at home. They're just soul lonely practitioners. And we have to find a way to get you guys out of your house and start talking to each other and start building communities where we can worship our gods, our ancestors, and build the folk across the world, across not just the world, but specifically in your own community that you live in, to make it stronger, to make your family stronger, to make our folks stronger.
Yeah, because like I mean, I can kind of relate similarly to me. Like, for the longest time, I really I didn't know anybody else in the in the Portland area of Oregon at all. I didn't know there was anybody even within driving distance. But as soon as I poke my head out, I find you, and I just find a plethora of other people. I mean, there's some bad groups out there. Or I'm not going to say bad groups. There are a lot of groups out there that I don't want to say a lot. There are groups out there that I would not recommend. But in just taking the risk and being willing to sift through groups and people, I found people. You know, like there are people that I've met.
Absolutely.
There are people that I've met that I would absolutely not bloat with or not do anything with. But I had to go through those people to find the good people.
No, absolutely. And a lot of it's just ignorance. People don't know. Here in the Pacific Northwest, there are our podcast is posted on the Wolfpack website. Whenever we release it, just automatically loads there. And there's a lot of traffic that site gets. So there's a lot of people that are interested in the wolf pack that I've noticed that are contacting us from universalist groups included. You know, where these are just individuals, but all their exposure has only been, you know, with certain groups. And they start hearing and reading about the traditional ways of practicing our religion, and they feel the call. They feel the naturalness of what we're speaking about and want to be involved in that. And it sometimes has to come through channels that aren't necessarily the best of channels, but just networking itself will get you in contact with those people that you are, that are able to teach you about the traditional ways.
Yeah, what's that saying? Real recognizes real?
Yeah, I think that comes from Compton.
I had to really go down about 10 steps further with that. Man.
Yo, my man, real recognize real.
Yeah, but, you know, sometimes you got to sift through the shit to find the diamonds.
Don't hate the player, hate the game.
No cap, player, no cap.
No cap. No cap, 4K.
Oh, no.
I hear these words from my son.
He is definitely a source of entertainment and street level knowledge.
Yeah, yes, for sure.
Good kid though, good kid. Tries to be at least.
He is a good kid.
Although I look at him and I wonder what you were like when you were 13.
I was 1,000 times worse. I mean, I grew up ignorant of my identity of who I am, who my people are. When I was 6 months old, my parents hitchhiked from the Northwest all the way to the Midwest, away from every family member that we had that were all from out here. And I grew up without cousins. I grew up without like extended family. And all there was my father, my mother, my sister, and myself. And we were in an environment there in the Midwest in a big city that was very mixed neighborhood, a lot of different influences, mostly negative. And it took a long time for me to grow up and really find my way back to my ancestors and my folk. And because I didn't have any understanding, nobody taught me about these things. And I 100% believe that if my son was raised in the same environment that where I was raised at, that it would just be a repeat of that. So I feel very blessed to have been able to come back out to the Northwest, where I'm originally from, have a family, have some property that's in the rural areas, and raise my children with good influences, where they don't know about, you know, the things that I had to deal with when I was a kid growing up, and be influenced by all of that. It's just degeneracy, really.
Yeah. I definitely banged my head against the wall a lot in my younger years.
Oh, that's going to be a good topic, man. We could do a whole episode on degeneracy.
Oh, we're gonna get flagged and banned, but let's do it.
Well, it's a problem. It's a problem, you know, because you have so many people from so many different backgrounds that are awakening to their native faith and consciousness of the folk, that not all of them are necessarily fine-tuned in the theology or the way of practicing. And so they come with a lot of baggage a lot of times, myself included. I have, and you can't help it in our society today, being raised in the sort of environments that we're all being forced to compete in and survive in, where we're essentially told at the age of 18, here, you're on your own, you're an individual, figure it out, which is completely different than how we have always raised our children and families historically in the past. I mean, we had multi-generational families in the past where you had the children, the parents, the grandparents all living, in close proximity, if not in the same homes and farmlands. And today, they're just thrown out to the wolves right away, so to speak. And I really would like to see us get to a point where we're back into the multi-generational family circles, where our children can be raised and taught from a young age that the importance of the family and that we rely upon each other. This is how we survive. That would help, number one, with drug addiction, all these problems our society has today, where, essentially it's just abused children that had no fathers, or fathers were abusive, because we've been stripped of learning the responsibility of taking care of our own people, let alone our own family members. And if we had multi-generational homes or properties, we would fix all of that right away. I have a guy at my work, he's Samoan, and he respects our faith so much, and I respect his and his culture so much as well. And we were talking the other day about this very topic of multi-generational households, because he was talking about the car he had driven to work. It was like a brand new Chrysler 300, or the latest edition that came out, or whatever it was. And he was telling me that it was his father's car, and that he had bought it for his dad. And apparently his sister also bought his dad a car as well. And I had just mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, you guys do like a communal fund with all of your money and stuff, right? He was like, yeah, that's how we do it. He was like, males do not leave the home until they're married. And then when they're married, that's when essentially they become, the head of their household. And in their tribal tradition, like, the woman is like, she's the queen of the home. Like, she runs what happens inside that house. But outside of the house, the men are the hunters, the gatherers, the warriors per se, and they're responsible for making sure that the house has everything it needs. Yeah. I just thought it was beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely similar to how our people used to live and build their families and communities.
Yeah. No, we absolutely need to get back to this.
Yeah. I mean,
but how do we do that, Anthony?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we all necessarily need to live in the same house, but definitely, living close to more folk, like literally building a community to where, like, your neighbors are members of your kindred or greater tribe. Like, fuck, take over neighborhoods. Buy, like, not illegally, not by force, but everybody pitch in and we buy houses and property that are right next to each other. So we build these safe havens for not only us, but our children.
The only problem is, because I try to do that, and then, people don't have money. People don't have, necessarily the will to do it. People have different ideas on, like, where they want to go. And at some point, it's just got to be, where people are like, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
We are going to do this. I know in the Pacific Northwest, we've always had a folk consciousness that's been pretty prevalent up here. And then we've always encouraged a greater migration from abroad to come to our areas. And I think that's something that's really important to do. And I encourage people to do the same. But unless people are willing to actually do it, it's really a point of frustration for us on a deeper soul type of level to heal, because that's what we need to actually heal. That's what we need to actually build community. But I don't know. It's a tough thing in today's society.
Yeah, well, and that's some of that is we are told from such a young age that we're an individual to the 10th degree. We have to have all our own stuff. That like what's ours is art, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. And we're driven to this point where like, I live in just a little 12-unit manufactured home park, but I don't even know the name of my neighbors. So we're driven to be individuals, and then we're driven to isolate ourselves, and it's almost to a point where it's counterintuitive to try to build these strong communities.
Right. And it makes it where it's more of like, oh, who am I? I'm James, or I'm Anthony. Instead of, oh, I'm James from this family, or I'm Anthony from this tribe. Whereas in the past, that's how we have always traditionally looked at that. And then after the Christian conversion of our folk throughout Europe and moving more into the modern age where this technology, and I really just think technology is a type of magic, really. And especially like the television, radio, these things are magical instruments or tools where ideas are spread and information is propagated. And this goes back to that vertical transmission of information where they are brainwashing everybody essentially to think that they're individuals and to attach themselves to the identity of that their government or local news source is trying to propagate to them, trying to define to them. The only way to counter that is the horizontal transmission of information and knowledge about our people. I have a dream. One day my children will grow up, and when they refer to themselves, they'll say, I am so-and-so, the son of so-and-so from this family,
Yeah.
We need to get back to that.
Let's just not have dreams, because it seems like people who have dreams get shot.
The irony. The irony.
Right.
Man, we didn't really get into stuff on the bloat and stuff, but that's okay. That we can certainly do that in another episode.
Yeah.
But because that's going to be a powerful topic, and it all ties together with occult, magic, the lore. These are important things to understand and important concepts to understand. And we have to dissect all of this information and hopefully transmit it to others effectively in a way that they're able to kind of their eyes glimmer a little bit, because they recognize, as you said, real recognizes real, And I hope that this podcast is exactly that for the folk, And I hope that people are beginning to realize, and I know they are, because I see this information getting relayed in various channels that I'm a part of. And it's very important that other kindreds or other people are having these conversations with the folk that they know and the folk that they interact with. Because if we're all doing this, if we're all having these conversations at the same time, this is how change happens. This is how we begin awakening and become stronger.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, I know we're pretty small, but I definitely feel like we're doing a good job of starting that horizontal transmission of knowledge.
We may be small in comparison to the 1 billion Catholics that exist out there, or whatever that number is, but paganism is actually the fastest growing religion in the United States and Europe. And Europeans actually make up the greatest number of pagans in the world, because I believe wholeheartedly that number represents the reality of our hearts, our souls, you know. And
Yeah.
it's just like, you know, there's when you're like at the ritual with all thing that we were talking about in the last episode, where we were all chanting this incantation to Frere. You know, there's actually a scientific study about this, where when people sing together, their heartbeats start to actually beat with the same pattern. And if we're telling these stories, if we're telling this information together and we're propagating this information, it's the same thing. Our minds and our souls and our hearts begin to beat as one. And that's what I am trying to do with this podcast, is to move forward, to make us stronger, so that our hearts can all beat as one and we can get to where we need to be for tomorrow.
It's been The Sacred Stew. I am Anthony. My co-host is James. Y'all have a good night.